Let me work for you." The peasant woman begged, never knowing the prince would one day make her his queen. On a frozen morning, a starving girl drops to her knees at the palace gates, her little brother clinging to her arm. Soldiers laugh. The church bell tolls. And just when hope seems lost, the heir to the throne stops his horse. But inside the castle, kindness is dangerous. The kitchens burn with jealousy, and the halls echo with whispers. At a grand feast, the girl saves the prince from a poisoned goblet, and suddenly, every noble eye turns on her. Now scandal spreads like wildfire. A secret betrothal, a scheming court, and a dungeon cell, where love may be crushed before it can bloom. What will happen when a servant's courage collides with a kingdom's pride? Can true love tear down the walls of birth and blood, or will the crown demand its price? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. Bitter wind howled across the frozen fields as Anneliese trudged along the muddy road, her legs trembling with each step. In her arms, she carried Carl, her younger brother, wrapped tightly in their last blanket, a patchwork of faded cloth that had seen better days. The morning sun offered little warmth as dark clouds scudded across the winter sky. "Just a little further, Carl," she whispered, adjusting the precious bundle in her arms. Her brother's face was pale, his cheeks hollow from too many nights without proper food. The failed harvest had left their village bare, and after their mother's passing, there had been no one left to help them. Whispers had reached their village of work at the palace. Any sort of work, even for common folk. It was their last hope. Anneliese's arms ached from carrying Carl for so long, but she wouldn't put him down. The mud would be too much for his weak legs. The palace rose before them like a mountain of stone, its towers reaching toward the gray sky. Guards in polished armor stood at attention by the gates, their red cloaks snapping in the wind. As Anneliese approached, their faces hardened. "Begone, girl," one guard barked, raising his pike. "The palace has no place for beggars." "Please," Anneliese said, her voice hoarse from cold. "We seek honest work, nothing more." "Away with you!" The second guard stepped forward threateningly. Before the thunder of hooves interrupted him. A hunting party approached, their horses' flanks steaming in the cold air. At their head rode a young man whose bearing marked him clearly as nobility, his back straight, his clothing fine despite the mud of the hunt. Anneliese's legs finally gave out. She fell to her knees in the mud, still clutching Carl to her chest. "My lord," she called out, her voice carrying on the wind, "I beg you, let me work for you, else we shall starve." Prince Leopold reined his horse to a halt. His companions murmured among themselves, but he paid them no mind. Instead, his eyes fixed on the sight before him, a young woman in a mud-stained dress, protecting a small bundle that he now saw was a child. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice gentle, but commanding. "Anneliese, my lord. And this is my brother Carl. Our mother ... her voice caught. "We have no one else." The prince dismounted in one fluid motion, approaching them despite his attendants' protests. He knelt down, a prince, kneeling in the mud, and looked at Carl's pale face. "How long has he been ill?" "Since the harvest failed, my lord. We've had little to eat, and the winter ... Anneliese trailed off, unable to continue. Leopold's face darkened with concern. He stood, turning to the guards who had tried to drive them away. "Take the boy to the palace infirmary at once. See that he's given proper care." "But your highness," one guard began. Now, the single word carried the weight of royal command. As gentle hands lifted Carl from her arms. Anneliese tried to rise, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The prince himself offered his hand, helping her to her feet. "You asked for work," he said. "Can you cook?" "Yes, my lord. My mother taught me well." Leopold nodded to a stern-faced woman who had appeared at the gates. "Mistress Helga, take her to the kitchens. Give her a trial." The woman curtsied. "As you wish, your highness." Anneliese found herself being led through the palace gates, past the guards who had tried to turn her away. The woman named Helga moved quickly through stone corridors, and Anneliese struggled to keep up on her trembling legs. Finally, they reached the kitchens. The heavy wooden doors opened to reveal a vast space filled with warmth and the smell of baking bread. After days in the bitter cold, the heat from the great hearths nearly overwhelmed her. Copper pots gleamed on the walls, and servants moved purposefully between tables laden with vegetables and cuts of meat, clutching Karl's blanket to her chest, the only piece of him she had left. Anneliese closed her eyes for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered, a prayer to whatever providence had led them here. "Thank you." The first gray light of dawn crept through the narrow kitchen windows, casting weak shadows across the row of sleeping servants. Anneliese stirred on her, thin straw pallid, her body aching from days of travel and hunger. The rough woolen blanket scratched against her skin as she sat up, taking in the unfamiliar sight of the palace kitchens, where she now slept alongside the other scullery maids. The head cook's commanding voice broke through the quiet morning. "Up with you all. These fires won't stoke themselves." His stern gaze fell upon Anneliese. "You there, new girl. Start with these." He thrust a massive basket of vegetables into her arms, nearly causing her to stumble. "Yes, sir," Anneliese replied, settling herself at a worn wooden table. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the knife, but she forced them steady. The familiar task of chopping vegetables brought comfort. She had done this countless times at home, though never with such quantities. Throughout the morning, the head cook watched her with narrowed eyes as she moved from task to task. When she finished the vegetables, he set her to scrubbing enormous copper pots that seemed to grow larger with each passing hour. The hot water turned her hand red, but she worked without complaint. "At least this one knows how to work," the head cook muttered to his assistant, loud enough for others to hear. A few of the older kitchen maids nodded in approval, but others cast sidelong glances filled with suspicion and envy. "Too proper by half," one maid whispered behind her hand. "Did you see how the prince looked at her yesterday?" The afternoon brought the endless preparation for supper, with Anneliese moving between stoking fires and helping plate elaborate dishes she had never seen before. As servants carried platters into the great hall, she caught glimpses of the fine lords and ladies in their silk and velvet. Prince Leopold sat at the high table, his bearing regal yet somehow different from the other nobles. While they barely glanced at the servants, his eyes often traveled to the kitchen door. "Wenegis." Young maid stumbled, spilling wine near Anneliese. Several courtiers laughed cruelly. But Anneliese simply helped the girl clean the mess, her face calm and dignified. Leopold's gaze lingered on this scene, something unreadable in his expression. Between her duties, Anneliese snuck away to visit Karl in the infirmary. The sight of leeches on his pale skin made her stomach turn, but the physician assured her this was proper treatment. Her brother's cheeks showed more color than they had in weeks, and he managed a weak smile when she entered. "The medicine tastes terrible," Karl confided, making a face at the dark herbal mixture beside his bed. "But the physician says I'm getting stronger." "Then you must drink every drop," Anneliese said firmly, though her heart ached at the sight of the strange treatments. She brushed his hair back from his forehead, noting with relief that his fever had indeed lessened as evening fell. Anneliese carried empty platters back to the kitchen, her arms heavy with fatigue. Passing through a dimly lit corridor, she heard hushed voices around the corner. She slowed her steps, not meaning to eavesdrop until words caught her attention. "The duchy cannot survive another season without funds," a man's voice whispered urgently. "The king has arranged everything." Prince Leopold's betrothal to the foreign princess will be announced within the month. Her dowry will save us all from ruin." "Thank heavens," a woman replied. "Though I hear she's a cold fish, that one. Still, better a wealthy princess than more years of this poverty." Anneliese stood frozen, the platter suddenly heavy in her trembling hands. She pressed one palm against the rough stone wall, then moved it to her heart, which seemed to have turned to lead in her chest. The weight of dread settled over her as the whispered words echoed in her mind. Betrothal, princess, arranged everything. Forcing herself to move, she continued toward the kitchen, her steps quiet on the flagstone floor. The warmth of the hearth no longer seemed as comforting as it had that morning. 2 days had passed since Anneliese began her work in the palace kitchens. The grand banquet hall buzzed with frantic activity as servants rushed to prepare for tonight's feast. In the steaming kitchen, Anneliese's arms trembled as she scrubbed yet another copper pot, her muscles aching from endless hours of work. Still, she kept her movements steady and thorough, determined to prove her worth. "Girl," the head cook's voice boomed across the kitchen. "Leave those pots. You're to serve wine tonight." He thrust a crisp white apron at her. "Keep your eyes down, pour smoothly, and don't spill a drop. These are noble folk, not your village neighbors." Anneliese's heart fluttered as she tied on the clean apron. She had never served at such a grand occasion before. The thought of being so close to the nobility made her palms sweat, but she couldn't deny feeling a small thrill at the chance to glimpse Prince Leopold again as evening fell. The banquet hall transformed into a sea of flickering candlelight and gleaming silverware. Lords and ladies in silk and velvet filled the long tables, their jewels twinkling like stars. Anneliese moved carefully between them, wine pitcher held steady in her hands. From the corner of her eye, she noticed another servant, one she didn't recognize, lingering near the high table where Prince Leopold would sit. Something about his furtive movements caught her attention. As she watched, he quickly pulled a small vial from his sleeve and tipped its contents into one of the golden goblets. Anneliese's blood ran cold. Without thinking, she hurried forward, just as Leopold approached his seat. The suspicious servant melted away into the crowd. "Your Grace," she murmured, reaching for the goblet. But her trembling hands betrayed her, and the cup tipped. Dark red. Wine splashed across the pristine tablecloth. Gasps erupted around her. The steward's face turned purple with rage. "Clumsy girl," he bellowed. "How dare you show such incompetence before His Highness?" "Wait." Leopold's calm voice cut through the chaos. He studied Anneliese's face intently. "You're the girl from the gates, the one with the sick brother." "Yes, Your Grace." Anneliese kept her eyes lowered, heart pounding. "There's something about this wine, ... The steward had lifted the fallen goblet, sniffing at the remaining drops. His eyes widened. "Your Grace, this bears the scent of nightshade." "Someone has attempted to poison me," Leopold finished grimly. He turned to Anneliese, his gaze sharp. "You saw something, didn't you? That's why you spilled it." "Yes, Your Grace. A man I didn't know. He poured something in your cup when no one was looking." The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Guards rushed to search for the mysterious servant, but Anneliese knew he would be long gone. Leopold raised his hand for silence. "This serving girl has shown both loyalty and quick thinking. From this day forward, she will serve as my personal attendant." His voice carried clearly through the stunned hall. "I trust her vigilance with my life." The nobles stared at Anneliese with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. She felt their gazes like physical weight upon her shoulders as she was led away to be instructed in her new duties. Later that night, Anneliese sat alone on her pallet bed, her mind whirling with the day's events. The other servants kept their distance, whether from jealousy or suspicion, she couldn't tell. The rough blanket wrapped around her shoulders offered little comfort as she contemplated her strange new position. "I asked only to work for you," she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely a breath. "Now I walk among lions." The words held both gratitude and fear. Gratitude for the prince's protection, fear of the dangerous games played in these gilded halls. Sleep was long in coming that night, as Annalise wondered what tomorrow would bring in her new role so close to power. Evening shadows crept across the palace corridors as Annalise made her way to Prince Leopold's study, her plain but newly made gray wool dress rustling softly with each step. A week had passed since the banquet incident, and her new position as the prince's attendant had brought unexpected changes. The fabric of her garment, though simple, felt foreign against her skin, so different from the rough homespun she'd worn in the village. The heavy oak door creaked as she entered the study. Beeswax candles cast a warm glow over the room's rich tapestries and towering bookshelves. Prince Leopold sat at his massive desk, his fingers stained with ink as he looked up from his papers. "Ah, Annalise," he said warmly. "Come, sit. We shall continue your lessons." She settled onto the wooden stool he'd placed near his desk, smoothing her skirts nervously. The prince pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment and dipped a quill in ink. "Watch carefully," he instructed, drawing letters with practiced grace. "These marks form your name." Annalise leaned forward, fascination overcoming her usual reserve. "Those little lines spell Annalise?" "Indeed." Leopold smiled, passing her the quill. "Now you try." Her fingers trembled as she gripped the unfamiliar instrument. The first attempts were clumsy, ink blotting and scratching across the parchment. But Leopold's patience never wavered as he guided her hand out as the candles burned lower. Their lessons often gave way to deeper conversations. Tonight, Leopold spoke of his struggles with the duties of leadership. "How can one rule justly?" he mused, "when tradition demands we treat some lives as worth more than others?" Annalise hesitated, then gathered her courage. "My lord, just today I witnessed Lady Margarita order her coachman to drive through a crowd of children in the marketplace. They were only poor children playing with a wooden hoop." Her voice grew stronger. "Their lives matter no less than any noble's child." Leopold's expression darkened. "Tell me more of what you've seen." And so she did, describing the casual cruelties she'd witnessed. Elderly peasants forced to kneel in the mud as nobles passed. Sick children turned away from the palace gates. Farmers' wives stripped of their winter stores to feed courtiers' hunting hounds. "You speak truth without fear," Leopold said softly. "Would that more of my advisors did the same." "I fear plenty, my lord," Annalise admitted. "But my mother taught me that God sees all souls as equal, whether they wear silk or sackcloth." "Your mother was wise." He smiled. "And please, when we are alone, call me Leopold." As the hours passed, Annalise's letters grew steadier. She found herself sharing stories of village life, the community's strength during hard times, the simple joys of harvest festivals, the wisdom passed down through generations. But their evening lessons did not go unnoticed. One night, as Annalise practiced forming sentences, sharp whispers drifted through the study's door. "The prince spends more time with that kitchen girl than at court," a woman's voice hissed. "Above herself, that one," another replied. "Did you see how she dared speak to Lady Margarita about the marketplace incident?" Leopold's jaw tightened, but he continued calmly guiding Annalise's hand as she wrote. She kept her eyes fixed on the parchment, cheeks burning with shame and anger. When the palace bell struck 10, Annalise gathered her practice sheets with trembling fingers. "I should return to the servants' quarters, my lord." "Take care on your way," Leopold said quietly. "And Annalise? Never let their words diminish your worth." She curtsied and slipped into the corridor, clutching her precious parchments close. The hall seemed darker tonight, filled with watching eyes and whispering voices. A group of ladies in waiting fell silent as she passed, their painted lips curved in cruel smiles. "Such airs for a scullery maid," one murmured just loud enough to hear. Annalise kept walking, head held high despite her pounding heart. The letters she'd practiced seemed to burn against her chest, secret treasures that none could take from her. In the darkness, she traced their shapes with her finger. Hope, strength, dignity. Words that were becoming her own. Early spring sunlight bathed the royal rose garden in gentle warmth. Annalise knelt among the dormant bushes, carefully pruning dead branches and checking for the first signs of new growth. Prince Leopold had requested she tend to his mother's beloved garden, a sacred refuge from the constant watchful eyes of the court. The garden walls, covered in sleeping vines, created a peaceful sanctuary. Stone benches nestled between the bushes, and a small fountain trickled nearby. Here Annalise could breathe freely, away from the whispers and suspicious glances that followed her through the palace corridors. "Sister, look, I found a ladybug." Carl's excited voice rang out across the garden. Annalise looked up to see her brother, cheeks now rosy with returning health, carefully cradling something in his small hands. Behind him stood Prince Leopold, watching the boy with gentle amusement. "Careful now, young Master Carl," Leopold said, his voice warm. "Even the smallest creatures deserve our gentle touch." Annalise's heart fluttered at the sight of them together. Carl had grown stronger each day, the palace physician's care working wonders where simple village remedies had failed. The boy wore clean, warm clothes now, and his eyes sparkled with renewed life. "Your Highness," Annalise said, dropping into a curtsy. "I did not expect—" "Please," Leopold raised his hand. "Here in this garden, let us speak plainly." He settled onto a stone bench near where she worked. Carl scampered off to explore a butterfly that had caught his attention. Leopold's shoulders slumped slightly, a weight seeming to press upon him. "This garden was my mother's refuge," he said quietly. "She taught me that true nobility lies in how we treat others, not in titles or wealth." Annalise's hand stilled on the rosebush. "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. Leopold's voice carried a trace of old grief. "I wonder what counsel she would give me now." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that spoke of deep turmoil. "The foreign prince's arrives within the fortnight. My father insists this. Marriage alliance is our duchy's only hope." Annalise's throat tightened. "Surely there must be other ways to save the treasury, my lord." "Leopold," he corrected gently. "And yes, there might be, if we had time. But the coffers are nearly empty." He watched Carl chasing the butterfly, his expression troubled. "The prince's brings a substantial dowry. Without it, we cannot feed our people through another hard winter." The weight of his words hung heavy in the spring air. Annalise's hands trembled slightly as she resumed her pruning. "Then you must do what is right for your people, must I?" Leopold's voice carried an edge of desperation she had never heard before. He rose and walked to where she knelt, taking her soil-stained hand in his, one of what is right for the heart. Annalise's breath caught as he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Her whole body trembled at the touch, torn between the soaring of her heart and the cold fear of discovery. "My lord Leopold, we cannot," she whispered, though she did not pull her hand away. "The scandal would destroy us both." "Do you not feel it too?" he asked softly. "This connection between us, this understanding that goes beyond station or birth?" Tears pricked at Annalise's eyes. "What I feel matters not. You are a prince, and I am. You are the most noble soul I have ever known." Leopold interrupted, his voice fierce with conviction. Neither noticed the shadow that moved behind a column in the far corner of the garden, where the chancellor stood, absolutely still, his cold eyes taking in every detail of the scene before him. The evening bells began to toll, their deep voices calling the faithful to vespers. Anneliese pulled her hand away, her heart pounding. "I must go," she whispered, gathering her gardening tools with shaking hands. "Carl, come!" Her brother ran to her side, still chattering about his garden discoveries. As they hurried away, Anneliese's lips moved in silent prayer. "Lord, grant me strength to bear what must not be." In his shadowed corner, the chancellor pulled a small piece of parchment from his sleeve. With practiced precision, he began to write a note to the king. His thin lips curved in a satisfied smile as he detailed every moment of the scene he had witnessed. The evening bells had just finished tolling when Anneliese slipped into the small palace chapel. Shadows danced on the stone walls from dozens of flickering candles, their warm light a comfort in the growing darkness. She moved quietly past the wooden pews, her footsteps echoing in the sacred silence at the altar. She knelt before the rack of votive candles. With trembling fingers, she took a fresh taper, lighting it from one already burning. "For you, mother," she whispered, placing it among the others. "Watch over Carl and me, as you always did in life." The heavy chapel door creaked open behind her. Anneliese turned, expecting to see one of the palace servants coming for evening prayers. Instead, Prince Leopold stood in the doorway, his tall figure silhouetted against the last rays of sunset streaming through the windows. "I hoped I might find you here," he said softly, approaching with measured steps that echoed through the empty chapel. "You always come at this hour to pray." Anneliese quickly rose and curtsied. "Your Highness, I should not be alone with you." "Here, please," Leopold said, his voice gentle but urgent. "I must speak with you." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the earnest look in his eyes. "These past weeks, working beside you, learning your heart and mind. Anneliese, I can remain silent no longer." Her heart began to race. "My lord, pray do not. I love you," he declared, taking her hands in his. "With all my heart and soul. I will never marry the foreign princess, nor any other. You are the only one I desire as my wife." Anneliese pulled her hands away, though. It pained her to do so. "Your Highness, we cannot. I am but a kitchen maid, a farmer's daughter. The kingdom needs your proper marriage to secure its future." "I care nothing for proper marriages," Leopold insisted. "What good is securing the kingdom's wealth if its prince must live without love, without you?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tell me truly, do you not feel as I do?" Tears welled in Anneliese's eyes as she struggled against the emotions overwhelming her heart. "My station, ... Your duty, ... Look at me," Leopold pleaded. "Forget stations and duties for one moment. What does your heart say?" The candlelight flickered across his beloved face as Anneliese finally allowed herself to speak her truth. "I love you," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "God help me, I have tried not to, but I love you with all my being." Leopold's face lit with joy. He drew her close, one hand gently cupping her cheek. "Then let God himself witness our love." In the sacred quiet of the chapel, his lips met hers in a tender kiss that seemed to stop time itself. Neither noticed the shadow that moved in the darkened alcove near the confessional, where the chancellor stood watching with cold calculation in his eyes. As the lovers shared their precious moment, he slipped silently from the chapel, his footsteps swift and purposeful through the torchlit corridors. He found the king in his private study, reviewing treasury documents by lamplight. "Your Majesty," the chancellor announced with a deep bow, "I bring grave news of a scandal that threatens the very foundation of your house." The king looked up sharply. "Speak." "It concerns Prince Leopold ... and a certain kitchen maid." The Chancellor's words dripped with false concern as he related everything he had witnessed in the chapel. The prince speaks of love, of refusing his proper marriage. He would throw away the kingdom's future for a common servant. The king's face darkened with rage. "This will not stand," he growled, slamming his fist upon the desk. "I will not have my son destroy everything I have built for the sake of a peasant girl's charms." Meanwhile, Anneliese made her way back to the servants' quarters, a single candle lighting her path through the darkness. Her heart soared with joy even as worry gnawed at her conscience. The warmth of Leopold's kiss still lingered on her lips, but something made her shiver despite her candle's flame. She pulled her shawl tighter, unaware that in the king's study, words were already being spoken that would seal her fate. Gray light had barely crept through the small window of the servants' quarters when the thundering of boots jolted Anneliese from her restless sleep. The heavy wooden door burst open, and royal guards in their crimson uniforms stormed in, their faces hard as stone. "There, the kitchen girl," one shouted, pointing directly at her. Before Anneliese could gather her wits, rough hands seized her arms, dragging her from a thin pallet bed. The other servant girls pressed against the walls, eyes wide with fear, not daring to speak in her defense. "Please," Anneliese gasped, her feet stumbling on the cold stone floor as they hauled her through the corridors. "What have I done?" The guards remained silent, their grip tightening as they marched her up winding stairs and through gilded halls she had never seen before. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a frightened bird. They stopped before massive oak doors, decorated with the duchy's coat of arms. The throne room stretched before her, morning light streaming through tall windows. At its far end sat the king upon his throne, his face thunderous. The chancellor stood at his right hand, a satisfied smile playing at his thin lips. To the left stood Prince Leopold, his face pale with barely contained fury. The guards forced Anneliese to her knees on the hard marble floor. She kept her head bowed, feeling the weight of every noble stare burning into her. "So, the king's voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. "This is the common wretch who would seduce my heir and bring disgrace to our noble house." "Father, this is madness," Leopold started, but the king silenced him with a sharp gesture. "The chancellor himself witnessed your indiscretion in the chapel," the king spat. "Do you deny it, girl?" Anneliese's throat went dry. She thought of Karl, weak but healing in the infirmary, depending on her completely. As if reading her thoughts, the king leaned forward. "Your silence condemns you," he said. "Perhaps you will find your tongue when you learn that your brother's care in our infirmary depends upon your confession. Speak true. Did you plot to trap my son with your common charms?" "No, your majesty," Anneliese's voice cracked. "I would never." "Lies," the chancellor called out. "I saw them myself, this kitchen maid and the prince, locked in an embrace most improper." Leopold strode forward, his boots ringing on the marble. "I will not stand silent while you threaten an innocent girl. Father, if there is blame to be had, let it fall on me. I love her, and no amount of silence." The king's roar echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "You forget yourself, my son. You are heir to this duchy, bound by duty and blood to preserve our noble line. Guards, take this scheming peasant to the dungeons until she learns her proper place." "No!" Leopold moved to intervene, but two guards blocked his path with crossed spears. Anneliese caught one last glimpse of his anguished face before she was dragged away. The dungeon air hit her like a physical blow, damp, cold, and thick with the stench of mold and worse things. The guards threw her into a small cell, the iron door clanging shut with horrible finality. Straw scattered the stone floor, and water trickled down one wall. No window offered comfort. Only a small barred opening in the door let in weak light. From the corridor's torches, Anneliese sank to her knees in the filthy straw, wrapping her arms around herself as shivers racked her body. "Carl," she whispered, "my little brother." Tears slid down her cheeks as she thought of him alone in the infirmary, wondering why she had abandoned him. Above, in his chambers, Leopold paced like a caged lion. His mind raced with possibilities. To defy his father openly would mean civil war, tearing the duchy apart. To flee with Anneliese would mean exile, leaving their people to his father's harsh rule. Yet the thought of submitting, of allowing Anneliese to rot in that dungeon while he married a stranger, made his blood run cold. Rain began to fall outside, pattering against the castle walls. In her cell, Anneliese curled tighter, on the damp straw, whispering her brother's name like a prayer as thunder shook the ancient stones. Each rumble seemed to mock her dreams of happiness, of love crossing the boundaries of class and custom. In the darkness, even her unwavering spirit began to falter. The palace trembled with the distant roar of angry voices. Through the iron-barred window of her dungeon cell, Anneliese could hear the growing chorus of peasants gathering beyond the gates. Their shouts echoed off the stone walls, demanding bread and justice. In the flickering torchlight outside her cell, shadows danced as guards rushed past, their boots thundering on the worn steps. The sounds of panic filtered down, servants whispering, nobles arguing, steel scraping against steel as weapons were drawn. "The whole village has come," one guard shouted to another. "They say if we do not give them grain, they will take it by force." Anneliese pressed her face against the cold bars, her heart aching. She knew their hunger, their desperation. Just days ago, she had been one of them, carrying Carl through the mud in search of mercy. Suddenly, hurried footsteps approached her cell. Keys rattled in the lock, and the door creaked open to reveal Martha, one of the kitchen maids, and Thomas, a stable boy. "Quickly," Martha whispered, reaching for Anneliese's hand. "The guards are all at the gates. We must hurry before anyone sees." "But why?" Anneliese asked, even as she stepped from her cell on trembling legs. Thomas steadied her. "Because you're the only one they might listen to. You're one of them, but you've lived among us too. You understand both worlds." They led her through twisted corridors and servants' passages, the sounds of the mob growing louder with each step. When they emerged into the courtyard, Anneliese gasped at the sight before her. Hundreds of villagers pressed against the palace gates, their faces illuminated by torch flame. Many were people she knew, farmers, craftsmen, mothers with children. Their eyes reflected desperation born of empty bellies and broken promises. At the gates, palace guards stood with crossbows ready, but their hands shook. These were their brothers, cousins, childhood friends they were ordered to threaten. "Hold steady," the captain commanded, but even his voice wavered. Anneliese moved forward, her simple dress trailing in the mud. The crowd's angry shouts faltered as they recognized her. "Listen," she called out, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "Please, my friends, listen." The mob gradually quieted, torches bobbing in the gathering dusk. "I know your hunger," she continued, touching her own thin face. "I know the sound of children crying in the night, their bellies empty. I was one of you. I'm still one of you in my heart." She took another step forward, close enough now to see individual faces in the crowd. "But violence will not fill our storehouse. Blood will not make the grain grow. If we storm these gates, many will die, fathers, sons, brothers on both sides. And then who will plow the fields when spring comes?" A murmur passed through the crowd. Some lowered their torches. "Have faith," Anneliese pleaded, clasping her hands together. "God sees our suffering. He has not abandoned us, and neither have all those within these walls. There are good hearts here too, nobles who wish to help if we give them the chance." She thought of Leopold, of his compassion the day he first saw her at these very gates. Change is coming, but it must come through love and understanding, not hatred and fire. The tension in the air began to dissolve. Women in the crowd wiped their eyes. Men lowered their makeshift weapons. "Go home to your families," Annalise urged gently. "Let us work together to survive this winter, help each other as neighbors. Should. I promise you will not be forgotten." One by one, then in groups, the villagers began to turn away. Their torches receded into the darkness like retreating stars. Suddenly, rapid footsteps sounded behind her. Annalise turned to find Leopold running across the courtyard, his fine clothes disheveled, his face flushed with emotion. He reached for her hand, clasping it tightly in both of his. The remaining torchlight caught the tears in his eyes. "My love," he whispered fiercely. "My brave, beautiful love. I will declare you as my bride before all the kingdom, no matter what it costs me. No more hiding, no more shame. You are worthy of a crown, and I will place one upon your head or wear none myself." His fingers trembled against hers as he made his vow, and Annalise felt hope bloom in her heart like the first flower of spring breaking through winter frost. Morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows of the grand hall, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Nobles lined the walls in their finest silks and velvets, their jewels glittering like stars in the golden light. The air hung heavy with tension and the subtle scent of fresh-cut flowers arranged for the engagement ceremony. The king stood before his ornate throne, his face drawn with exhaustion from the previous day's unrest. Beside him, the foreign princess waited in dignified silence, her elaborate gown rustling softly with each measured breath. Leopold stood rigid at the bottom of the dais, his shoulders squared beneath his formal attire. "My people, the king's," voice carried across the hushed hall, though it lacked its usual commanding tone. "These are difficult times. Our treasury demands immediate attention. This alliance through marriage will secure our future, Father." Leopold's clear voice cut through the air like a bell. All eyes turned to him as he stepped forward, his boots echoing on the marble floor. "I cannot proceed with this engagement." Gasps rippled through the assembled nobility. The foreign princess's face remained carefully neutral, though her fingers tightened on her fan. "You forget yourself," the king warned, his voice low but carrying in the silent hall. "This marriage must proceed. The duchy's survival depends upon it." "Our survival depends on more than gold," Leopold declared, his voice growing stronger. "It depends on truth, justice, and love." He turned to address the gathered court. "I love another, a woman who has proven her nobility not through birth, but through her actions." The great doors opened, and Annalise entered, escorted by 2 guards. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair modestly arranged, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. Whispers erupted among the nobles as she approached. "This woman saved my life," Leopold continued, extending his hand to Annalise. She took it, trembling slightly but standing tall. "When others plotted to poison me, she risked everything to prevent it. When our people rose up in anger yesterday, she alone had the courage and wisdom to calm them with words of peace and understanding." Through the windows came the sound of voices, hundreds of them, chanting Annalise's name. The peasants had gathered again, but this time not in anger. Their calls grew louder, a tide of support washing against the palace walls. The king's face darkened. "The people's affection does not change the laws of nobility, nor fill our empty treasury. True wealth lies not in coffers alone," Leopold responded, his voice ringing with conviction. "It lies in the hearts and loyalty of our people. Annalise understands their struggles because she has lived them. She knows their strength because she shares it." Annalise stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "Your Majesty, I never sought position or power. I came to your gates seeking only the chance to work and save my brother. But God's path led me to love your son, and through him, to love this land and all its people." The chanting outside grew stronger. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded slowly, won over by the truth in her words. The king stood silent, his inner struggle visible on his face. The weight of tradition warred with the wisdom of his son's words. He looked from Leopold's unwavering gaze to Annelise's gentle strength, then to the windows where his subjects called her name. Minutes stretched like hours as the entire court held its breath. Finally, the king's shoulders relaxed, and something like wonder crossed his face. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "true nobility shows itself not in birth, but in action. Perhaps real wealth lies not in gold, but in the love of the people." He straightened, his voice growing stronger. "Then let her be your queen, and let her virtues be our wealth." The pronouncement rang through the hall like a physical force. Nobles gasped and murmured. The foreign princess quietly closed her fan, a small smile playing at her lips. Annelise's knees weakened at the words, but Leopold's steady hand held her upright. Tears of joy sparkled in her eyes as she looked up at him, seeing all their future in his loving gaze. Sunlight streamed through the cathedral's stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across Annelise's simple white bridal gown. The dress, though unadorned with jewels or fine lace, seemed to glow with an inner radiance that matched the joy in her eyes. Outside, the streets overflowed with celebrating peasants and townspeople, their excited voices carrying through the thick stone walls. Behind her, Karl walked tall and proud, his once frail body now strong and healthy. His small hands carefully held her train, and his face beamed with pride. The sickness that had nearly claimed him was nothing but a distant memory now. Thanks to the palace physician's care, as Anneliese moved down the aisle, nobles lined the pews in their finest attire. Some bowed their heads with reluctant respect, while others smiled, won over by her grace and courage in recent weeks. The head cook stood among the witnesses, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. At the altar, Leopold waded in, his formal royal attire, his eyes never leaving Anneliese's face. The bishop, resplendent in his ceremonial robes, raised his hands for silence. The cathedral grew quiet save for the gentle flutter of candle flames and the distant sounds of celebration from the streets. "Before God and these witnesses," the bishop intoned, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, "we gather to unite not just two hearts, but a kingdom with its future queen." The ceremony proceeded with ancient dignity. When the time came for the crowning, Leopold lifted a delicate golden crown from its velvet cushion. As he placed it gently upon Anneliese's head, he leaned close and whispered words meant only for her. "You asked only to work for me. Heaven made you my crown." Tears welled in Anneliese's eyes as she looked up at him, remembering that desperate morning at the palace gates. She understood now that true nobility had nothing to do with birth. It lived in compassion for others, in sacrifice for those we love, and in the courage to follow one's heart despite all obstacles. The bishop pronounced them husband and wife, prince and princess. The cathedral erupted in cheers, the nobles' polite applause mixing with the enthusiastic shouts of the common folk who had been allowed to witness the ceremony from the back of the church. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the palace gardens, Anneliese and Leopold walked hand in hand along the graveled paths. Karl ran ahead of them, chasing butterflies between the rosebush that now bloomed in profusion, their sweet scent filling the evening air. The great bells of the cathedral began to toll, their deep voices rolling across the valley in waves of joyful sound. Anneliese stopped beneath an arbor of climbing roses, lifting her face to the evening sky. Tears of pure joy sparkled on her cheeks as she smiled, her heart too full for words. Leopold squeezed her hand gently, and together they watched Karl's carefree play among the flowers, their love a testimony that faith, courage, and a true heart could overcome any barrier. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.